Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu, and with me is Nipunika Shahid, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. Prime Minister to visit Lumbini in Nepal on the occasion of Buddha Purnima on Monday. President Ramnath Kovind to embark on the state visit to Jamaica and St. Vincent and Grenadines from tomorrow. Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says comprehensive economic partnership agreement to significantly open doors to a plethora of markets across the globe. Inaugurates India-UAE Economic Partnership Summit in Mumbai. Indian Embassy in Ukraine to resume its operation in Kiev from 17th of this month. Merchandise exports register 30% growth in April, while service exports increase of 53% compared to same period last year. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will pay an official visit to Lumbini in Nepal on Monday on the occasion of Buddha Purnima. He is visiting the Himalayan nation at the invitation of his Nepalese counterpart Sher Bahadur Deuba. This will be the Prime Minister's fifth visit to Nepal since 2014 and his first visit to Lumbini. Giving details about the visit of Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary Vinay Mohan Quatra said in New Delhi that the visit reaffirms India's commitment and demonstrates the priority it attaches to the neighborhood. He said at Lumbini, the Prime Minister will visit the sacred Maya Devi temple to offer prayers. He will also deliver an address at the Buddha Jayanti event organized by the Lumbini Development Trust.
The visit will, 1. add to the positive momentum in our bilateral ties generated by high-level exchanges, including by the last visit of Prime Minister Deuba to India in April. And 2. The visit also reaffirms our commitment and demonstrates the priority that Government of India attaches to the neighborhood.
During his visit, Mr. Modi will also participate in the Shilanyas ceremony for the construction of a Center for Buddhist Culture and Heritage in a plot belonging to the International Buddhist Confederation, New Delhi, within the Lumbini monastic zone. Both the Prime Ministers will hold a bilateral meeting. Prime Minister Modi's visit continues the tradition of regular high-level exchanges between India and Nepal in furtherance of India's neighborhood first policy. It underscores the shared civilizational heritage of people of both countries. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has expressed grief over the passing away of United Arab Emirates President Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed. In a tweet today, Mr. Modi said, Sheikh Zayed was a great statesman and visionary leader under whom India-UAE relations prospered. He said, the heartfelt condolences of the people of India are with the people of UAE.
President Ramnath Kovind will be on a state visit to Jamaica and St. Vincent and Grenadines starting tomorrow. This will be the first ever visit by an Indian head of state to these Caribbean nations. The President will be in Jamaica from 15th to 18th of this month, where he will hold delegation-level talks with his counterpart, the Governor-General of Jamaica, Sir Patrick Allen. He will also meet Prime Minister Andrew Holness and other dignitaries. During the visit, the President will address the joint sitting of the two houses of Jamaican Parliament. While addressing the Media Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs, Saurabh Kumar said that the visit will help strengthen the bond between the nations. Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal and Economy Minister of United Arab Emirates Abdullah bin Tawq Al Mari inaugurated India-UAE Economic Partnership Summit in Mumbai today. Both leaders also launched India-UAE Startup Bridge to boost the economy. This summit was organized by Confederation of Indian Industry. Speaking at the inaugural session, Mr. Piyush Goyal said, India and UAE have huge potential to work together, and the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement (CEPA) will significantly open the doors to a plethora of markets across the globe and help in building a future-ready, more robust and resilient bilateral partnership. The minister said the India-UAE partnership is best defined by its tagline openness, opportunity and growth, and asserted that the trade between the two countries is expected to grow to at least $100 billion in the near future. Now, entrepreneurs and stakeholders from both countries will have access to know about the startup ecosystem. It will help in capacity building of incubators, incubation opportunities for startup, he said.
Country's overall exports, including merchandise and services, scaled a new high in last month. Overall imports exhibited a growth of around 39% in comparison to corresponding period of last year. Country's exports are estimated to be $67.79 billion in last month. Merchandise exports crossed $40 billion mark, and service sector reached $27.60 billion in last month. Merchandise exports registered 30% growth, wherein service export registered an increase of 53% in last month in comparison to corresponding period of previous year. The Commerce and Industry Ministry said petroleum products, electronic goods, processed food, leather products lead the way with significant increase in exports. Non-petroleum, non-gems and jewelry exports were $28.46 billion, registering a positive growth of 19.89% over the corresponding period of previous year. A court in the Sri Lankan capital Colombo imposed a ban on former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and several of his key allies from leaving the country on Thursday. According to media reports, the travel ban has also been imposed on Rajapaksa's son and former minister Namal Rajapaksa, Johnston Fernando, Pavitra Vanirachichi, C.B. Ratnayake, Sanath Nishanta and Sanjeeva Edirimani, among others. Mahinda stepped down as Prime Minister on Monday following weeks of intense anti-government protests amid an ongoing financial and economic crisis. Sri Lanka is currently suffering its worst economic crisis since its independence in 1948.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on developments in Sri Lanka and its impact. In conversation are Veena Sikri, former diplomat, and Manish Anand, journalist.
Sri Lanka is in the midst of a deep financial and political crisis. The Sri Lankan rupee is in a free fall. $1 is costing 373 Sri Lankan rupees. And amidst the Sri Lankan crisis, a new Prime Minister has been sworn in, Ranil Wickremesinghe. He has been sworn in as the fifth Prime Minister of the island nation. Ambassador Sikri, Sri Lanka is in one of the worst crises since its independence. How do you see the new development that Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is a political veteran there, is back in the saddle?
You are right that Sri Lanka is in a very deep economic and political crisis. The start of the whole crisis was economic because of the policies of the President Rajapaksa's government that, the foreign exchange ran out, taxes were cut, and then of course compounded by COVID and by sharp fall in remittances from abroad. The foreign exchange just ran out, and in an import dependent economy like Sri Lanka, it has caused a huge economic crisis and a lot of individual hurt and difficulty for the people. So there are queues for everything. There is no fuel, there is no medicine, no medical aid, no power, there are blackouts, and of course the people have been protesting. Earlier this week on Monday, the Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa stepped down and resigned, and of course the cabinet along with him. So for a few days there was no government, but now Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has been sworn in. This is his sixth term as Prime Minister in Sri Lanka. But I think at this very moment, the crisis is not yet over. What it has, in the first 24 hours of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe joining as Prime Minister, we have seen that on the one hand, the political parties, including the members of parliament from the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's party, as well as some members of parliament from the SJP, Sajid Premadasa's party, and some others, they have expressed support for Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. So it is clear that he will be able to win the majority to continue to be the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. But at the same time, there is a great reluctance from many of these political groupings to join the government of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. So even there was one name being mentioned as the Finance Minister, and that person is from the SJP, Sajid Premadasa's party. We all know that the SJB is a breakaway wing from Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe's party, the UNP. The UNP is the oldest political party in Sri Lanka, and before the last elections in 2020, there was a split. The SGB broke away under Sajid Premadasa, and they had got, after the ruling party of President Rajapaksa, the SJP had got the largest number of votes, and they were the opposition, the main opposition. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was on his own. So now with this situation, on the one hand, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has a lot of credibility within the country and abroad as a good administrator, as a person with sound economic sense, and a person who would be able to bring in the reforms. And perhaps in discussion with the IMF and other countries, India has always extended its help in full measure to the people of Sri Lanka. There was a hope that under him this would happen, and he would be a very credible Prime Minister of the country. That hope is still there, and we hope that over the next few days, after the initial reactions that have been there in the first 24 hours, that not only will Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe be able to win the motion, the support for himself in Parliament, that is going to meet on Tuesday, 3 days from now, and that he will be able to form a government. So, of course, there will be a lot of discussions, there will be a lot of political discussions with all groups, and we have every hope that Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe will be successful in forming a government and in leading the country out of the present economic and political crisis that is there.
Indeed, Ambassador Secretary, you have given a thorough insight into the background of Sri Lankan crisis. But one issue is that Ranil Wickremesinghe is just a nominated member of the parliament, and his party doesn't have any membership other than him in the parliament, to which he himself has told a British broadcaster that even Winston Churchill, when he became the Prime Minister in 1939, had just 4 supporting members in their parliament. And on Tuesday, the opposition is moving a no confidence motion, though there is no provision of such a thing in Sri Lankan parliament, while the speaker there has admitted it as a displeasure motion. So in this politically fragile situation, do you think that Wickremesinghe, being known as a supporter of the Gotabaya Rajapaksa, will help out Sri Lanka in the crisis?
Well, you see, on the one hand, I think Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe is absolutely right. It's not a question of the number. Yes, he is on his own as a representative of the UNP in this parliament after the 2020 election, but at the same time, an extraordinary situation like Sri Lanka is facing right now does demand extraordinary solutions. And so he has been requested by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to accept the post of Prime Minister, which he has done. At the same time, we do know that all the protests which are still going on in Sri Lanka, they're still there at Ballface, they're still outside in all the other parts of Sri Lanka. The protests are still going on, and these protests, of course, are aimed at the expression of extreme displeasure against the current economic crisis facing the country. But basically, the protests are for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to step down. So this is the crisis. That the crisis is that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa must step down. Go, Gota, go is the slogan of the entire protest. Now it was, I suppose the President hoped that with Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa stepping down, that everything would die down and he would be able to continue. But no, this has not happened. The protests are still continuing. At the same time, for Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, it's very difficult, that he has been asked to be Prime Minister by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. So how does he do that? How does he fulfill the demand of the protesters for the president to go? It's a very tricky situation. It's a very difficult situation. But I do hope that with the skill of Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, his great experience, the number of times he's been Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, that a solution will emerge. And whether the solution will involve President Gotabaya Rajapaksa stepping down or not, it's impossible to say at this stage. I think the key thing is for Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe to form his government, to get a good cabinet, to start discussions with the IMF, and gradually to persuade the people of Sri Lanka that they must get back into facing up to the situation and getting together to overcome the situation.
Indeed, Ambassador Secretary. In fact, when Wickremesinghe was the Prime Minister last time, he had negotiated a bailout package of $1.5 billion from the IMF. And now again, this island nation is negotiating a $4 billion IMF bailout package. Why is the economy so fragile that the country has to reach out to the IMF so frequently? Definitely the pandemic and a terror attack a few years back precipitated the current situation.
I think, of course, the terrorist attack that you just mentioned was a horrible event, a dastardly event, but it was a big shock to the people of Sri Lanka because such an event had never happened on the soil of Sri Lanka before. And they had always been saying and describing themselves as a very peaceful country, which of course it has been, especially after the LTT war had ended. So they expected that with that war having ended, the troubles and violence and unrest of the past was over, and that, as far as tourism was concerned, they would be a very peaceful country. But that did not happen because that horrible Easter Sunday terrorist attack smashed the peace to smithereens. After that, I think with the elections in 2020, when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa assumed the presidency with his brother as Prime Minister, they won a huge mandate. There is no doubt about that. After winning the mandate, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa passed a constitutional amendment assuming enormous powers in the presidency. So that situation is what is causing a huge problem because he has so many powers of the presidency within his hands that there were no checks and balances left. And then the economic policies of the last 2 years, first of all, cutting the taxes, which meant that, the income, the revenue of the government fell drastically. And then foreign exchange reserves were not sufficient to meet the demands of the import requirements of the Sri Lanka economy. They were heavily dependent on imports, but they also had a buoyant foreign exchange revenue earner in terms of tourism, in terms of remittances from abroad. And of course, the earnings of the plantation economy that is there in Sri Lanka. But over the last 2 years during the COVID pandemic, the tourism dried up completely because of the lockdowns and the remittances also crashed because everywhere there was a lockdown and, earnings of expatriates dwindled. So with the result that the foreign exchange requirements could not be met. And also, Sri Lanka is an economy in huge foreign debt. We know that with China itself, 10% of the foreign debt of Sri Lanka is to the country of China. And China has imposed very, very strict import, and they have no free credit line, they have no grants, but they give loans with very usurious conditions, high rates of interest, very staunch return conditionality, and even the Hambantota port, which was set up as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, had then because Sri Lanka could not return the loans. So the port had been leased to China for 99 years, which is a terrible loss of faith for the Sri Lankan government. Again, the Rajapaksa themselves. And even under the present crisis, China has shown no interest at all in helping out the Sri Lanka government with short-term grants or short-term assistance. And it's a sharp contrast to what the government of India has done for the people of Sri Lanka, because India has extended about $3.5 billion as assistance and has been sending shiploads of fuel, shiploads of rice, shiploads of medicines to help the people of Sri Lanka. So with the result that with the foreign exchange resources drying up, a sharply mounting debt, Sri Lankan government of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has just declared itself bankrupt. They have defaulted on their debt repayments. And as a result, they find themselves in a very serious condition and they've had to go to the IMF for a bailout so that they can meet their debt repayment liabilities and also the extreme conditions that the economy demands for meeting the imports and other requirements of fuel and food and medicines and so on. So the IMF bailout became necessary because of that. And certainly I think Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe's experience in negotiating with the IMF will stand in good stead in the present circumstances. One hopes that after the parliament meets on Tuesday, the situation will calm down, the government will be formed and the IMF negotiation will start and some kind of a move back on the path of recovery will take place. There is little doubt, however, that all the IMF negotiations come with a sharply difficult condition in terms of a rise of prices, in terms of policies to be implemented. And as you know, as you mentioned, the Sri Lanka rupee is in free fall against the dollar, which is a huge difficulty for the people of Sri Lanka. So, all these conditions are there. It is still a very, very difficult situation. One can only hope that the path of recovery, which has started with the swearing in of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, will continue with his formation of the government and negotiations with the IMF.
Indeed, Ambassador Sikri, you rightly said that China has been completely invisible, though the world is now talking about Sri Lanka as the perfect example of debt trap policy of China, which is dragging many countries into deep economic crisis. Today, Wickremesinghe called on, Indian ambassador Gopal Bagle called Wickremesinghe, and India, being an immediate neighbor of Sri Lanka, has been playing the role of a stabilizer. And Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, when she was on the US tour, also had reached out to IMF and other players to intervene in the economic crisis of Sri Lanka. But Ambassador Sikri, we see that Sri Lanka is in the midst of deep human rights crisis also, absence of essential goods, electricity, LPG gas, and so on. So do you think that India needs to step up its support to the island nation in the coming days?
Well, India has expressed its willingness to do that, and India has expressed that it's got a open doors policy to Sri Lanka, and whatever help they need, whatever help they express, we will certainly do our best for the people of Sri Lanka. We have said this repeatedly time and again. I'm very glad that High Commissioner Gopal Bangle has called on Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, and I'm sure their discussions would have covered the immediate requirements of the government and people of Sri Lanka to meet their immediate requirements of, fuel for their power plants and, oil and so on, kerosene and diesel, and also of food, immediate requirements of food, because we do know that one of the steps that had happened, that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa had declared that they would have natural farming, and so they stopped imports of fertilizers, and that led to a collapse of the agricultural plantation crops, which had been the mainstay of the Sri Lankan economy in terms of export earnings. So that too meant the food shortages have come up, and India had been fulfilling that requirement as well by sending shiploads of rice and other food requirements. So I'm very glad that High Commissioner Gopal Bangle, in his call on Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, has expressed the readiness of the government of India to continue their aid and assistance with open arms to the people of Sri Lanka. And I'm sure this will continue. And I just hope that once Parliament meets in Sri Lanka on Tuesday, that this will all sort itself out and Indian assistance will surely continue.
Let's hope that Sri Lanka comes out of this phase of economic crisis and political stability returns to the island nation. Ambassador Sikri, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter @AIR News Alerts. The Indian Embassy in Ukraine will resume its operation in Kyiv, Ukraine from 17th of this month. External Affairs Ministry said Indian Embassy was temporarily relocated to Warsaw on 13th of March this year.
A Dhaka court sentenced former Army Chief of Bangladesh Harun al-Rashid and 46 officials of the Destiny 2000 company to varying jail terms yesterday on charges of money laundering. The case relates to the embezzlement of a huge sum of money from more than 8.5 lakh investors for the project. Destiny 2000 Managing Director Mohammad Rafiqul Amin was sentenced to 12 years. Former Army Chief Harun al-Rashid was sentenced to 4 years jail. Destiny 2000 Chairman Mohammad Hussain was sentenced to 10 years. 39 of the convicted people are absconding and were sentenced in absentia. The Destiny 2000 scam is considered to be the worst multi-level marketing scam in Bangladesh. It came to light in 2012 after the country's Central Bank of Bangladesh noticed the huge irregularities in the scheme launched in 2008. The judge in his verdict declared that the assets of the company will be liquidated to compensate the shareholders and investors of the scheme. Harun al-Rashid is a retired Bangladesh Army General. The two-day Indo-Bangladesh Joint Committee meeting on peaceful uses of nuclear energy concluded last evening. The two sides expressed satisfaction at the ongoing collaboration on the Rupur nuclear power plant project. They discussed avenues to further enhance bilateral cooperation in the field of science and technology. The Bangladesh side expressed appreciation for the services being rendered by the Indian experts currently deployed at the Rupur nuclear power plant. Both sides also stated their desire for collaboration in societal applications of radiation technologies in areas such as cancer care, nuclear medicine and food prevention. The meeting was fruitful and covered the entire gamut of our bilateral cooperation in peaceful uses of nuclear energy applications in the field of health, agriculture, water purification including capacity building, training among others, said a press release issued by the High Commission of India in Bangladesh yesterday. The Indian delegation was led by Ranjit Kumar, Chairman of Advisory Council, Global Center for Nuclear Energy Partnership GCNEP and Head of Nuclear Controls and Planning Wing NCPW in Department of Atomic Energy DAE, and the Bangladesh delegation was led by Mohammad Ali Hussain, Additional Secretary Nuclear Power in Ministry of Science and Technology of Bangladesh.
At least 11 people are dead and dozens were rescued after a boat capsized on yesterday off the coast of Puerto Rico. The U.S. Coast Guard said in a statement the vessel, which was suspected of taking part in an illegal voyage, overturned. A U.S. Customs and Border Protection aircraft spotted the capsized vessel and people in the water about 11 miles north of Desecho Island. The Coast Guard launched multiple helicopters from Air Station Borinquen and diverted the Coast Guard cutter Joseph Tezanos as part of the rescue operation. North Korea has confirmed its first death from COVID-19. Local media reported today that 6 people died after suffering fever, with 1 testing positive for Omicron. State media reports that tens of thousands more are experiencing fever symptoms. The official KCNA news agency reported that the outbreak extended beyond the capital. North Korea had rejected offers from the international community to supply millions of AstraZeneca and Chinese-made jabs last year. Instead, it claimed it had controlled COVID by sealing its borders early in January 2020. Meanwhile, South Korea has said it offered humanitarian aid. However, Pyongyang is yet to respond.
And now a report from the business world.
At the stock markets, erasing all its solid gains in the last hour trade. Sensex at the Bombay Stock Exchange ended 137 points at 54,794 today. Nifty at the National Stock Exchange shed 26 points of 15,702. At the global stock markets, the key indices at other Asian markets ended higher. So Japan's Nikkei 225 index jumped 2.6%. China Shanghai Composite Index climbed 1%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index surged 2.7%. South Korea's Kospi Index added 2.1%, and Singapore's Straits Times Index gained 0.8%. In Europe, London's FTSE 100 and France's DAX had climbed 1.5% each. The Germany's DAX had added 1.2% in intraday trade. Global oil prices rose today as worries about inflation and China's COVID lockdown slowing global growth offset concerns about dwindling supplies from Russia. So the Brent crude futures rose 85 cents to trade at $108.30 a barrel. US crude futures climbed to 64 cents to $106.77 a barrel. And at the foreign exchange market, the rupee weakened by 4 paise against the US dollar to close at 77 rupees and 45 paise. Arjun Chaudhary for World News, All India Radio.
In Thomas Cup badminton tournament in Bangkok, the deciding match of the semi-final tie between Indian star shuttler HS Pranoy and Denmark's Rasmus Gemke is now underway after Danish pair Anders Skarup Rasmussen and Fredrik Sogard defeated Indian duo Vishnu Vardhan Panjala and Krishna Garaga in 4th match to make it 2-2. The Danish pair defeated Indian duo 21-14, 21-13 at the Impact Arena in Thailand today. Earlier, India's ace shuttler Kidambi Shrikant registered a thumping win against Anders Anderson by 20-18, 12-21, 21-15. Indian duo of Satvik Sairaj, Rangi Reddy and Chirag Shetty won against Kim Astrup and Matthias Christiansen 21-18, 21-23, 22-20. Olympic champion Denmark's Axelsen beat Indian shuttler Lakshya Sen 21-13, 21-13.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Here are the press reports on Nepal. The Kathmandu Post writes, as many as 150 climbers reached the summit of Everest, the world's tallest peak, on Thursday morning, with a Nepali woman climber smashing her own previous record. The Himalayan Times writes, she had earlier climbed Mount Annapurna without using supplemental oxygen and has also become the youngest female in the world.
Now let's have a look at the press reports on Pakistan. The Express Tribune reports a special court Central Judge summoned Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Punjab Chief Minister Hamza Shehbaz by May 14 to frame charges against them despite federal investigation agencies' earlier decision not to prosecute the alleged money laundering case against them.
Press reports on China. Prasar Bharati Beijing reports that 9th meeting of SCO transport ministers was held on Thursday. Prasar Bharati Beijing reports India's ambassador to China Pradeep K. Rawat met with Director General of the Department of Asian Affairs of the Chinese Foreign Ministry Liu Jinsong.
A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister to visit Lumbini in Nepal on the occasion of Buddha Purnima on Monday. President Ramnath Kovind to embark on the state visit to Jamaica and St. Vincent Grenadines from tomorrow. Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says comprehensive economic partnership agreement to significantly open doors to a plethora of markets across the globe. Inaugurates India-UAE Economic Partnership Summit in Mumbai. Indian Embassy in Ukraine to resume its operation in Kiev from 17th of this month, and merchandise exports register 30% growth in April, while service exports increased 53% compared to the last same period year.
And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Bhajan, by artists from Nepal.
मन अभिमान
with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.